What's the fastest you've ever seen a new coworker get fired? Story 1. Mail on Friday from the boss. Let's welcome Mary back on Monday from her maternity leave. Monday, 8:10 a.m. Mary crying, saying goodbye to everybody. She was laid off by the same boss just as she came in the office. Story 2. 4 or so hours. When I was 18, I got a job at a grocery store along with 3 others. We all started training together. On the first day, we were training in the evening, and one girl asked to go home. She said her head hurt. They said fine. She clocked out, went to grab a grocery cart, and started filling it with beer and liquor. The store manager walked over and asked her if she was having a party. She said yes. Didn't even try to come up with an excuse. Just, yeah, I am, so I needed to leave early on my first day, basically. He fired her. Story 3. An intern on his first day decided to open the door of a room where a few of the seniors were having an important meeting. He briefly lifted his leg up, farted, and walked away laughing. He got fired on the spot. Story 4. We had a chef turn up for a trial week and was put on desserts. First night, he drank a whole bottle of Malibu that was meant for the fruit cocktail and got sent home for being too pissed. Following morning, he turned up early ready for work and had no memory of being sacked the night before. Story 5. 3 weeks, which you may be thinking isn't fast, but as a doctor is like lightning. We had a new doctor in the emergency department who was hired during COVID to fill some of the rota gaps, and he seemed friendly enough. He got put on his first week of nights and didn't see a single patient. He just disappeared into the rest of the hospital. He was caught asking a first-year resident how to read a hip x-ray that was clearly fractured. He had to have all his patients reevaluated because then his work was being brought under review. It was an absolute nightmare. Hiring standards during COVID got pretty loose because we were stretched to, but that sure was something. I've never seen a doctor show up and disappear that fast. As an aside, a doctor hired alongside him was openly worse than the level of seniority he was hired at, was open about it, was dropped down to the appropriate level to train at, and everyone appreciated that the guy knew his limits. Story 6. Regular at my bar came in and ordered his regular, beer and a shot. Served him 3 rounds over about an hour and a half. Then my business partner's wife came in and said, "All right, XXXE6, ready to start your training." He'd been hired as a bartender without my knowing. Started his first shift 6 deep. I didn't even rat on him. He made it about 10 minutes before she asked why he smelled like Evan Williams. He then dropped a beer into the ice well on his first pour. I'd say 10 minutes is one of the fastest. Story 7. We had a morning toolbox talk to introduce the new guy. The boss made an announcement and introduced them and said what they would be doing and asked the new guy to say a few words. He gets up and the first words out of this guy's mouth is, "Morning C hash and teas." The boss interjected and said, "You know what, don't bother," and told the guy to leave immediately. We all just sat there like stunned mullets. Story 8. Came in, decided she didn't like the color of the walls, fought with the boss about painting them because the current color didn't match her social media vibe, was fired after 10 minutes, then tried to sue the boss because she wanted to quit before he fired her. Apparently, she couldn't think of a way to make herself the victim in the story for her social media. Story 9. I sat him down and welcomed him to the company. During the orientation, myself and other employees emphasized that smoking and vaping are prohibited in the building. It's a big deal, and we have signs everywhere stating so. I gave examples of why it's prohibited and sent them on a 15-minute break. The boss walks into the bathroom into a cloud of vape smoke. When I asked him, his response was, "I was in the bathroom. It's a private area. You can't tell me what I can do in a bathroom stall." I walked him out of the building. He lasted 2 hours and blew a decent salary for our area. Story 10. Watched our new receptionist get walked out after 2 hours because she wouldn't stop eating during client meetings. Not like a quiet snack full on crunchy chips and slurping smoothies while people were trying to talk. Her defense was, "I'm a foodie," when HR stepped in. Story 11. Not my story, but this happened to a friend. Orientation was all virtual due to COVID, and on the first day, one of the girls forgot she was on mute when she decided to talk to her boyfriend about working with the Jew bags. Now, anti-Semitism is never a good thing, but it turns out that it's particularly inadvisable when you work at an investment banking firm in New York City. She was gone from the system by the second day of orientation. Story 12. New coworker, F30-ish, sat next to me, M25, in the office. Started sending me Teams messages of underwear randomly that she owned, links to shop websites, constant touches on the leg, weird comments here and there, even after me asking her to stop. Called it out to my manager. She was fired the next day, a week into her starting. Glad they took it as seriously as they did. Story 13. X tried to get a job where I worked, spent the entire interview trash-talking me. Hiring manager thought the accusations were way out of character for me and asked me a few follow-up questions. X was technically never hired and blacklisted from any property owned by my employer. Actual you're fired moments? New employee accused the black manager of being anti-white when he had to tell her to get off her phone and get back to work. She was regularly late. He let every other late day go without giving her attendance points and still had to fire her on week 2. Story 14. New guy had a habit of coming in late for his shift. One day, he came 20 minutes late, sat down and started to eat his breakfast he brought from home. The foreman was enraged and said, "F this, I am done," and called the department chief to deal with him. When he came, the foreman told him, that guy came 20 minutes late again, and if that wasn't enough, he sits down eating his bread rolls like at home. The new guy protested, said the foreman was totally lying, so the department chief said, "Well, let's hear your side of the story then. What's wrong here?" And being totally serious, he said it was a corn spitz, meaning he had not eaten white bread rolls, but a regional product which is basically a grain roll that looks like a mini loaf. It's a bit hard to translate as there is no English word to describe it precisely. He basically did not protest that he is coming late and starts having breakfast, but because the foreman said he was eating white bread rolls while he ate a grain product which is more like black bread. So the chief of department looked puzzled, but eventually regained composure and went in his office without saying anything to the guy. 15 minutes after that, the guy got a call from his temp agency telling him to go home. Story 15. A 20-year guy got hired to work the seafood counter. See him twice, and then never again. Asked a coworker what happened. He had closed seafood one night and was walking out of the store, and the 6 pounds of crab legs he'd stuffed down the back of his pants fell out in front of the closing manager. Story 16, second week, 2-day conference. My new colleague Matt gets wasted and then proceeds to try and kick down his new female boss's hotel door down, thinking he was well in earlier in the night. Woke up half the hotel and was asked to resign by 5 p.m. the next day. This guy's job was to work with vulnerable kids, and incredibly, he went back to his old place of work. I assume they eventually found out why it didn't work out with us. Booze and work don't mix. Story 17. My husband got a friend of his an interview where he was working. The friend's interview went great, and he got hired. He was excited and did a donut in their big gravel parking lot, and they called him right after and told him that was unacceptable and don't bother coming in. Story 18. Got caught using the trainer's ID badge to access a printer to make copies of a prescription pad he stole from a doctor. He wanted to hook people up at his new office. This happened on day 3 of training, and everyone was already sketched out by his unhinged comments and behavior leading up to this, so it didn't really surprise anyone. Story 19. I still haven't, and probably never will know the truth of it, but my niece was fired 45 minutes into her first day at a restaurant, and her mom had to go there and talk them out of pressing charges against her. I suspect it was theft and her mom paid them back, but they won't admit to it. Story 20. New hire on first day was sitting down on the job. Manager asked him what he was doing, and he responded with, "What the hell do you do around here?" She said, "Do you want to know what I do?" She walked him to the office and fired him. Story 21. Kid came in on his first day thinking he could boss everyone around since he just finished culinary school. Strike 1. Caught him later that day vaping in the prep area of the kitchen. Strike 2. He asked on his second day if he could leave for 30 minutes to make a DRXG deal. Needless to say, that was strike 3. Story 22. I fired a person who was hired to help take care of an invalid relative after 2 hours. I had gone to store. She was told to prepare lunch. No lunch made. She was on the landline phone the whole time I was gone. She was dismissed without any pay, of course. When I got the phone bill, she had been talking to somebody in Poland. Story 23. He crashed the company car, reversing it out of the garage, and lied about it. It was a small dent. The incident was caught on camera. I asked him if he wanted to change his statement. He accused me of calling him a liar. It was his second day on the job. Hardest part about that was his wife was friends with my then-girlfriend, and he started telling everyone that I had it out for him. Don't do favors for friends, I guess. Story 24. About 5 days. I was working groundskeeping for a cemetery and memorial garden, and the owner hired his nephew's company to lay PVC pipe to extend a water hookup 200 yards to a new hand pump. It was not a hard job. The pump was literally straight downhill. Dig, grade, lay. He did the work, then told the boss there wasn't enough water pressure from the water company to execute the job. The owner fired his nephew, but incongruously didn't ask for his money, a couple thousand back. We, 2 workers making $10 an hour, dug it up, and he had somehow graded it almost 10 degrees uphill. You could eyeball it and see it was slanted. Story 25. About 2 hours in, a new hire for our window washing company straight up ran away. Young Asian guy, maybe about 20 years, seemed eager to work but severely underestimated how physically demanding it is to be a window washer. That day, we were a crew of 6 guys, doing a fairly nice home in Beverly Hills with large windows, and after about 90 minutes, my little dude asked how much longer we'd be working. I let him know it would be about 5 more hours. Bro said he was going to the work van to get his Gatorade, all right? I look back over my shoulder and he's just took off in a full sprint down the street and never came back, LOL. At $20 an hour, though, I don't even blame him. Truth be told, that was some hard-ass work. But we did it because we were all being paid cash under the table, and most of the people working for that company weren't legal anyway. Story 26. We hired a young woman to man the business line telephone. She had to redirect the calls to the right person department. They let her sit and watch, listen, the first day, so she understood how things work. On the second day, she went on her lunch break, but did not return. They tried to reach her. This was pre-cell phones, but couldn't. Everyone was worried. We feared she was in an accident or something. The next day, someone drove by her home. She was at home, came to the door, said she had phone anxiety, and this wasn't a job for her. She didn't quit the job, just didn't show up anymore. She was fired that day. Story 27. We hired a woman at a medium-sized retailer as a stalker. I was supposed to train her that morning. Before we started, we and the rest of the crew, about 6 of us total, needed to take the recycled cardboard to the dumpster. The dumpster was right outside the door, and with everyone helping, it would take about 2 trips each, and then we were done. After the first trip, she sat down and said, "Women shouldn't have to do this work, so I am not going to do this." I said, "Okay, then, let's go talk to the manager and see if that's okay." Walked her to the office and never saw her again. Story 28. I had to train a guy who told me, the trainer, that he wasn't getting paid enough to learn the computer system that our jobs relied upon. I told the ops manager, and the new guy was kicked out the door. He lasted a whopping 15 minutes and spent twice that amount of time arguing with the ops manager in the parking lot that he was only joking. Story 29. Friend owned a luxury car salon. Hired a guy who decided that he wanted to take a GTR for a ride around the block before he even got to cleaning it. The car span out of control and crushed the bumper on a sidewalk. Got fired immediately, and my friend's insurance is after him. Story 30. When I was working at a grocery store, a woman got hired to be a stalker, but would sit on the floor while she worked. The manager kept telling her to stand up, and she kept sitting back down on the floor as soon as he left. Finally, he told her to go home. She thought she was just getting sent home for the day. She came back the next day, and the boss had to explain that he meant she was fired. It's the only time I've ever seen anyone get fired on their first day and their second day. Story 31. A guy came in one afternoon after traveling interstate to us and landing a little before close of business. Fresh new contractor we'd never worked with before, with a fairly rare skill set we specialized in. He popped into the office the afternoon before to get his laptop and get set up. He goes back to a hotel and comes in next morning. We had hot desks, but I always got in first and got my preferred desk. He came in super early and was in next. I was pleased as we had a big day. As the new guy, he sat next to his boss, me. He opens his brand new branded laptop and then heads to the toilet. As soon as he's out of earshot, the laptop starts loudly playing porn. The screen is locked and the volume is right up. In a bit of a panic, I can't get it to shut up. Not the function key shortcut for mute, not the power button, nor closing the lid would silence it. He came back from the toilet and I fired him. He left before anyone else arrived at the office, and I had to explain to a customer that we were going to be late with a resource. Great days. Great. Story 32. One day, and I fired him. He hit on every woman in the office and threatened violence to another male employee. He was completely insane and somehow hid it in the interview. I was on vacation when he was hired. Subsequently fired the person that hired him. The whole situation was completely mental. Story 33. On her first day of work, she was asking all of us if she could hit someone's vape. Then when the boss realized there were too many people working, they asked if anyone would like to leave for the day, and this girl immediately raised her hand. And then on her way out, she hit my boss's car. My boss ended up calling her to come back, and it took her about 40 minutes to come back. She got fired right then and there. Story 34. The very first day, within a few hours, in fact. A woman was hired at a pretty small place and used to work at. Typical office space for around 30 employees with a single small break room at the center. I was only 16 at the time and eating lunch with a few others when the vending machine ate someone's money by almost dispensing their chips. They tried the usual gentle tap on the glass and reaching their arm inside, but it was futile. The new employee came in to see this, and she was a giant of a woman, absolutely enormously tall and broad shoulders. She barked at everyone present, "Out," then slowly shut the doors to the room. I can only attest to what I heard, but I think she grabbed the machine and shook it back and forth, jostling it so violently, people's heads started to emerge from cubicle bays like gopher heads. A minute later, and she emerged triumphantly, with the bag of chips smiling. My boss was already moving through the small group of whispering people who timidly assembled. She escorted the champion of a woman to her office and shortly later, out the front door. Never seen something like it in my life. Story 35. I worked at McDonald's in high school. We had a kid take the cash drawer, jump the counter, and run on his first day. The ass had fully filled out all his paperwork and everything with his real name and address, though. Story 36. I work in a call center and have been there for several years. As management, we would go and introduce ourselves to new hire classes on the second or third day, and there was always at least one person who had to be the loudmouth. After we introduced ourselves, the department manager asked the trainer what they were covering that day, and the trainer said they were discussing difficult customers. Mr. Loudmouth spoke up and said, "If someone starts being a jerk with me, I'll just tell them I know where they live and will pay them a visit. I have a trunk full of guns that will make them start being nice." One of the other new hires said, kind of sheepishly, "He really does." We all kind of made light of it, but after we left the classroom, our manager said we needed to do something about it. She emailed the trainer who had the person in the class who said the guy did have guns come to her office. After some questions, it turned out that Mr. Loudmouth did actually have several guns in his trunk and was proudly talking about them, as well as showing them to some of the classmates. Our manager called the local PD, who made him open his trunk. He had several rifles and handguns in his trunk and was immediately fired for bringing firearms onto company property and threatening to use customer information to cause harm. Story 37. We've had 3 instances of hiring developers, highly recommended and accredited, who A, couldn't do the most menial tasks, for example, connect to a DB, B, refused to get off their phones, social media, during key meetings. This was in a corporate environment, so it took a few weeks, but their fate was basically sealed in the first few days. We had suspected they cheated their interview exercises, but couldn't prove it, and my department lead was gung-ho in hiring them for some reason. I was sure one guy was getting fed lines to my questions, but no one believed me at the time. Story 38. On his first day, we had a new employee doing some onboard computer training in the office. We have cell phones for the delivery trucks lined up on a table near the desk he was sitting at, and he took one and never came back from his lunch break. I guess technically he wasn't fired, but still. On story 39, about 15 minutes, I once trained a server that seemed to me to be acting strangely. She came in for her first shift and would say a word salad sentence and then look to me for a response. I took my first table of the shift and she interrupted his order by stroking his face and saying his skin was so smooth. The guest was obviously uncomfortable and I apologized and excused us. In the back, I asked her what medication she was on or what she took. She simply walked out the back door and never came back. Story 40. I was working for a large corporation and I had a highly anticipated new hire starting. I went down to security to let him in the building and get him a badge. His first words were, "Wow, your husband let you leave this morning in that skirt? He's a lucky man." I just looked at the security guard, said, "Never mind," and I went back to my office. I'm absolutely convinced that he just needed an accepted offer letter and had no desire to actually work. Story 41. We were freelance tech writers brought into a major communications company to help write a new manual. Day 1, she doesn't have a laptop. I guess assuming that they'd provide one for her, which is fine, and no one had a problem with that. When they said that they assumed that she'd have a laptop, she said that she did, but wasn't planning to lug it around with her on public transportation. That was her last day. Story 42, not fired, but they quit within a week or two. They had interviews. They showed her the laboratory. She started working. Then she quit because the laboratory doesn't meet my safety standards and I want a child soon. Mind you, the lab offers everything she needed to be safe. She just had to actually use the safety equipment. If I paraphrased it right, she was unhappy that she wasn't forced enough about safety. Story 43. Myself. When I was about 19 or 20, I started a temporary job in a confectionery warehouse. The morning I started, a supervisor asked me to turn out my pockets, which were empty, in front of other workers. When it became clear I hadn't tried to pilfer anything, he just said, "I'll be watching you." He obviously wasn't watching closely enough because he didn't duck a slap upside the head. I was fired immediately. Didn't even make it to lunch break. Story 44. Women interviewed well and was offered the job. First day, the manager is running 5 minutes late. Manager gets to the office and the new hire is in the office. Manager: "How did you get into the office?" New hire: "I opened the door with a credit card." Manager: "You broke into the office on your first day." The new hire was shown out and the manager called building security to improve the locks. Story 45. I'm in Toronto for context. This was 2019 when the Raptors were on their way to win the NBA championship. This guy named Redacted was a big Raptors fan and was newly hired. Well, the Raptors win the championship. He flat out tells his trainer, "I'm gonna call in sick tomorrow. The Raptors won the finals. I can't miss that parade." It was his second day. Story 46. One lady was hired on as an accountant finance something. There were a few weeks between her onboarding pack being mailed out and start date, which was enough time for the real her to realize that her identity was stolen. HR fired her when she walked in the door, and the police had some questions to ask her as well. Story 47. I think I answered this one before, within a minute of receiving a job offer. Work used to hire students, and usually with the last names of our directors and senior managers. Kid gets offered a well-paying landscaping job for the summer. After the congrats, he is told to report in at 8 a.m. next Monday at a certain location. He tells our hiring person that he doesn't like early mornings, and he'll come in around 9:30 or 10, and they can just pay him the hours that he actually works. He was told, no, those are the terms of employment, and the call was ended. His director dad tried to smooth things over, but the hiring manager wouldn't take him after that. And yes, his dad was a bit of an asshat too. Story 48. Onboarding at a corporate restaurant. During the orientation video, the video said, "You wouldn't say that to your grandma." And someone shouted out, "I would if she looked like that." It was a terrible line in a terrible corporate video, because what if a room full of people of varying ages didn't know, have, or recently lost their grandmas, but dude still earned being asked to leave? Pretty sure it was a test, and he failed before he even got to provide his ID for hiring. Story 49. Dude showed up for his first shift high out of his mind and smelling like weed. Because he was high, he couldn't figure out how the time clock worked and couldn't clock in. He wandered into the office to ask for help clocking in while our boss happened to be there. Boss smelled him, and then brought him into the office to fire him for showing up high. It took less than 10 minutes between trying to clock in and being walked out the door. Story 50. A new coworker hire who used charming nicknames for everyone. Chief, boss, guy, champ, etc. Annoying, but whatever. A regular client came in with the co-owner of the place. He said something to them but was far enough away so as to be inaudible. The client gave him a blank stare, and the co-owner gave an annoyed look, followed by a shake of the head. Half an hour later, he was gone. Story 51. A guy said something a little odd in his interview, but seemed like a good fit for the role. We offer him the job, and he accepts. There's a day where they come in and meet everyone before starting, which my manager deals with. I'm on holiday, and WhatsApp messages start coming through from the manager. Apparently, he's made a fuss about us taking a copy of his driving license, saying he was told he wouldn't have to do any driving for the job. This isn't true, and the advert says driving will be involved. He hands them over anyway, making you wonder what the point was. He then gets into the office where he'll be working and makes several comments about how much money he's going to be getting paid for what he obviously feels is going to be an easy job. The manager has a quiet word. We've got people on apprenticeships and on lower-than-market salaries, the company paying for their further education, and how bragging about your pay in front of these people is a bit of a dick move. His reply was something like, "I've got to speak my truth and nobody has the right to tell me I can't." One of his references comes back saying they would never, ever hire him again for any role. We withdrew his offer the week before he was due to start. He was the first person I made a job offer to since being made a manager, and the rest of the department still give me a ribbing for it 2 years later. Story 52 came in from an agency. Showed up so high he moved in slow motion. I didn't even know he was the new hire. Just showed up and my boss said, "Make sure he puts that in the right truck." I thought the new hire was a customer because he was taking so much time. He didn't last the day, safety and all. They told me they called the agency and told him to go by lunchtime. Story 53. I worked at a pawn shop. Before being hired, you had to do an audition-type shift. Work behind the counter for a little while. Help the employees, see if you're a good fit, etc. We interviewed a guy and invited him for an audition shift the next day. When he arrived, he was wearing his best punk goth regalia. Giant black pants with chains, piercings in his face, the whole nine. He was dressed well for his interview, so this caught us off guard. He was not offered a position. Story 54. I was the employee in question. The job was a volunteer role for a small op shop which claimed to help get a real job. The first day went fine, no problems beyond inexperience. If you've ever done retail, you can guess how it went. The second day, the manager was in, and everyone was obviously terrified of him. One of the other volunteers was going on to a real job later that week, and the manager was giving her a horrible time for it. He gave her way more tasks than anyone else, shouted at her for every little delay, slowed her down again, then shouted at her again when she got further behind, all while insisting that this was what the real workforce was like, and threatening to get angry despite obviously being the angriest person on the room. Typical terrible manager behavior. I'd like to say I stood up against him bravely and everyone clapped. But actually, I just called the guy an asshole in front of everyone and he fired me at the end of the day. Then I had a panic attack and he kept grilling me. Bullet taken, nuke dodged. Thanks for nothing, asshole. And that's why you pay attention to red flags in an interview. Story 55. Hiring managers hired this looper for sales, knowing full well that he would not end up on their team. So another sales MGR would have a situation to deal with. Plus, they wanted a laugh to see what happens. First day in, he put a frame pic on his desk of his wife, who was like 20 years younger than him, in a reader's wife pose or OnlyFans. Nobody believed she was his wife. Collodes of antics, unprofessional behavior. One day he just stopped showing up to work, never heard of him again. His time was short, but he was the talk of company, and he sure gave us a laugh, except MGR, who had to manage him. Story 56. Worked in a busy restaurant pub in the city. Staff recruitment on the floor is like a revolving door sometimes. We give people a trial shirt shift to see if they like the PAE of things, etc. This girl didn't have a uniform yet. She hadn't given her information to the accounts guy yet. She was on her first day after that training day, so she was alone sometimes. The staff would help her if she needed it, but the wheels were off technically. There's one main, till that has the drawer with cash. You're not allowed near it when you're at her level. The manager goes to float that till at the end of her shift when there's €150 missing. She makes sure it's not in like gift cards or anything weird. Nope, cash gone. They go back in the CCTV and sure enough, here's new girl. She had pink hair, so she stood out, hanging around by the till. The manager is 99% of the time standing right next to it. This must have been when she was helping other tables or down in the basement for stock. New girl goes over to the till, must have seen someone open it in her training and boom, slipped a €50 out. Not the smartest thing to do since that's very noticeable. She does this another 2 times on her shift when she sees a gap. The manager came around the corner at one point and saw her at the till. New girl had just closed it so she didn't see. She asked what she was doing, and the girl was able to say she was printing a receipt quickly and get away. Her second official day on the job, she walked into a trap. Everyone acted normal, and sure enough, she swiped another €50. They waited and brought her downstairs and showed her the footage. She was a student and seemed straight-laced. They asked for the money back, and she said it was already in her bank account. She paid it all back and claimed her boyfriend for forcing her to steal. Story 57. At the one office job I worked, I saw a new girl come in and do her 2 training shifts, and then she went on vacation to Israel. Apparently, she had planned this trip long before she got hired, but never told my boss when he was interviewing her that she would be leaving for a week as soon as he hired her. She was being hired part-time for the busy season. She never came in for an actual shift, and I had to work double shifts with overtime because the person who was going to relieve some of my workload wasn't employed anymore. Story 58. It was me, twice. In college, I was looking for a part-time job. Got hired at a game store in a nearby mall because they needed bodies for Christmas shopping season. On my first day, we're discussing my availability over winter break, and I informed him if I stayed on campus, I would have to pay extra dorm fees, and to make it worthwhile, I would need to work almost every day. He told me that wasn't possible, and that I would only get 2-3 shifts a week, so I said that I would be going back home for winter break, since it would just be costing me money to stay here. He told me to leave, so I did. Bonus moment. When I turned around to leave, there was a stack of Monopoly games behind me that I didn't see, and I walked into it and knocked it over. He told me to help clean it up before I left, and I said, "Sorry, I don't work here," and left. A few months later, I got hired at my dorm as a maintenance person. Coincidentally, my microwave in my room broke around the same time. My second day, I took a microwave from storage and replaced it. Didn't think anything of it. I was maintenance. I'm not calling myself to fix something. Boss told the building manager, and he called me to his office and fired me for not filling out the proper paperwork. I said that was my bad, and I could just fill it out now because I didn't know I had to. And he said I couldn't be trusted and basically stole the microwave. I said that's ridiculous, and asked why the maintenance boss didn't just tell me to fill the paperwork out and instead went running to management, but he just said, "We're done here," and told me to leave. Fun story about him. I got hired as an RA that same year, and one night when I was working, he came into the building so drunk that he wasn't wearing pants or underwear, and he tried to hit on a female student returning to her room. It was fun hearing that he got fired. Story 59. We hired a new girl on a Friday. She was to report to work on Monday. No show on Monday, no show on Tuesday. We called, emailed, and no answer. On Friday, mom calls us that she's had a cold and couldn't come into work. We replied that she should tell her to not bother to come in at all. Story 60. Not exactly funny, but kind of UAW dropping at the time. I was getting hired at a big academic hospital for a basic low-tier non-clinical position. First day after doing our online stuff, we got a big tour of the hospital ending in a routine paperwork and going over our basic procedures. Our team lead was going through some very basic scenario, do's and don'ts, one of which was, if a patient becomes combative, what do you do? Basic answer of call for help, back up, and de-escalate. This young woman insisted that if she was Tao, he'd in any way she would punch them in the face. We all thought she was joking and gave a half-hearted laugh. She insisted. She insisted to such a degree that she told us a story of how she punched her grandma. Team lead tried to shut her down before she kept going. She kept going and then slammed a bug pocket knife on the table and said, and this is what they'd get stabbed with. They kept it up. Yeah, they were escorted out by security. Story 61. I was working as a promoter for a nightclub. This guy was coming for a trial shift when we were running a ticketed event. Seemed nice. His fiancée came asking about him dressed on theme for the night. Then the second we finished, he asked to get a staff wristband to go claim discount drinks and not have to pay his way in. The resulting argument lost for him fired. Not that I think he planned on continuing. Story 62, second day. Working retail, about 1998, 18-year-old dude hired straight out of high school. As in, he'd graduated on Wednesday, started Thursday, this happens on Friday. I'm helping train him at the customer service desk. Dude spends the entirety of the time, and I mean the entirety, trying to hack the inventory management system on the computer and get access to a web browser. SQL injections on the search, all kinds of things. Half the time he had the process manager and not the company's software up on screen. Possibly because most of the rest of us were female, he seemed to assume we were all computer illiterate and would have no clue what he was doing. He was wrong. He was also not a very good H4X0R. As I recall, all you had to do was pull up the release notes in the system, which opened a TXT file in Notepad, and then try to open a .x in Notepad. Anyway, he was let go just before lunch. Story 63. A few years ago, this very sweet young lady has joined our team as an office assistant. Just some basic administrative and office tasks. Think very basic Excel, scanning and organizing documents, handling some emails, occasionally purchasing some office supplies, and so on. I did not see her interview, but I did see her CV, and it said she's had a couple years of experience with this kind of stuff. Also, she was hired, so, she can't be bad, right? Right? Fast forward to her first day. She arrived at 10, and I was the one responsible for training her to do this job. I showed her around the office and sat her down in front of her desktop computer, which had already been set up for her. The first red flag was when I instructed her to turn the computer on. To my surprise, she'd asked my assistance for that. There was no trick to turning it on either. Just press the big button on the tower PC and the one on bottom side of the monitor where it's marked with the power symbol. I marked it up as her just being nervous or tired, and I pressed on while maintaining being as respectful and patient as possible, trying not to stress her out further. I tried to keep some basic chat going on as well to make her feel more comfortable and not make this seem like a day with a drill sergeant. I showed her details and instructed her to log on to Windows, but she did not realize that you had to click the text box to enter your credentials and that you need to click that little arrow next to it or press enter to finalize your login. I helped her out again, but this just kept going on. She was struggling with following basic instructions such as opening a file manager, finding locations on the hard drive or the network, renaming or copying files, and so on. I had to show her how everything was done, but the sad thing was that none of it clicked with her at all. She could do what I was telling her as I was telling her, but she was completely clueless as soon as I wanted to let her do it on her own. At this point, I politely asked if she would be more comfortable working with a Mac computer instead, thinking maybe she's more familiar or had more experience. Her answer to that question was, I don't know, what's that? Okay, that's a no. I then politely tried to inquire about her previous experiences with computers to see if maybe there's some way I can make this easier for her. Her answer was, well, I have a smartphone. Without having to ask her, that's it. I knew that, that was it. With some struggles, we kept going, but I always had to explain the same thing over and over. And even with that, she was always unsure on what to do or how to proceed. I was very tactful and patient, but it was increasingly difficult. Boss arrived at 2 and brought me in to ask me how it went. I felt horrible, but I had to be honest here. The job was really simple to do, but there was a lot of it to be done. So the company did not want to invest in training her on how to operate a computer. As a result, she was out of the gate before 3 o'clock. What really baffled us all is how she managed to maintain a similar job before, seeing as this was quite obviously her first time using a computer. But we may never know. Luckily, I was not the one who had to break her the news. She was devastated. Story 64. I was a trainer for a company, had an employee first day of training. They had done an orientation at the office. I informed him he needed to shave before we could start training. He said no problem and went and shaved in the restroom. I told him to go ahead and get his shirt tucked in. It was outside of his pants. And he said, "You have to do that here?" I quit. Story 65. Certainly not as egregious as most of the stories in here, but I used to work in a restaurant and the new dishwasher that I was training named Austin got fired halfway through his second shift. He would actually refuse to do work that was assigned to him. I demonstrated to him how to change the soap, but didn't actually do it so that he would learn how himself. It was a simple 3-step process, and I told him to change the soap out while I used the restroom. I came back 60 seconds later, and he was just standing there staring at the cooks working, the full bottle of soap still on the counter. I asked him why it wasn't changed yet, and he just looked at me and didn't respond. He actually started doing some work on his second shift, and dishwashing isn't exactly rocket science. So within maybe 30 minutes, I had taught him pretty much all there is to know about the position. My boss cut me early to let Austin take over, and when came back for my next shift, my manager told me that he had to fire Austin. At the end of the night, the line cooks disassemble parts of kitchen machines, and the dishwasher has to scrub, wash, and then replace the parts. My manager was taking care of other things, and when he checked in on Austin, who had been shown and told exactly what he needs to do with all those kitchen parts, Austin was again standing there staring at other people working while there were dirty dishes and kitchen parts stacked up so high that you could barely see him. My manager asked why he wasn't washing dishes, and Austin shrugged and said that he didn't want to do it. Manager obliged and fired him right on the spot. Story 66. Opening a new retail store. I had just joined out of college. We were putting all the shelves together and merch on them. As we weren't open yet, the fire inspection came. Another new hire there could not contain his excitement over the firefighters, and he spent 30 minutes ogling and making inappropriate comments until the store manager came over and said, "You can come home and don't come back." Story 67. Had a dude from the Middle East refuse to work the position he applied for when he learned a lot of the work was outside, and his coworker was from Somalia. He legit called him a monkey, and then claimed I, Sweden, was racist for firing him. This was my first month of officially being in a management position of a team I had previously been team leader for. Trial by fire. The next day, the entire production greeted me with the white power first, and that's an ethnic melting pot.